thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. Our main event is Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton on election reforms, the latest COVID stimulus package, the political art of arm twisting in the Republican caucus, and what does the Tennessee legislature have against Memphis? Top of the podcast, let's stick with the legislature here. The bill there by Republican State Senator Brian Kelsey of Germantown to do away with any residency requirements for police and firefighters anywhere in the state has stalled in the House. The bill sent to a summer study committee and could return again next year in the second half of the two-year legislative session. Meanwhile, Kelsey, one of 4 no votes on a Senate resolution by Memphis Democrat Ramesh Akbari, adding to the Tennessee Constitution a provision forever prohibiting slavery and involuntary servitude in the state, except for prison inmates. Kelsey voted for this bill on the first of 2 rounds required to get this on a statewide ballot in 2022 for voters to make the amendment official. Kelsey said from the Senate floor this past week he opposes slavery, but voted no this time because the 1870 state constitution already does what the amendment would do. He called the bill, quote, fake history. The Senate approving the permitless gun carry bill proposed by Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, a bill opposed by local law enforcement here, as well as the city and county mayors. On several other law enforcement matters, some city council members not happy with changes in the way a new Memphis police director is being chosen. The International Association of Chiefs of Police turned a list of 7 finalists over to Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland, 3 from the ranks of MPD deputy chiefs, 4 from outside the department. Panels of citizens selected by the administration to meet with the 7 privately, and Strickland to interview the 7 privately as well. The city sent out a list of who was on each of the 4 citizen panels and the breakdown of the different groups this past Thursday at around 5:30 p.m., the day of the interviews, ending with a 60-minute session with Strickland, also private. Council members 3 days earlier asking when they get to talk to the 7, and they were told by City Human Resources Chief Alex Smith that they could submit questions to those in the private sessions and get to talk with whoever Strickland picks when he presents at the April 6th Council Committee session on this. The nomination does go to the City Council for confirmation. Cheyenne Johnson is the only council member involved in the private panel interviews. If 2 or more council members attended one of the private sessions with the finalists, the meetings would have to be open to the public. The only panelist involved in the critical mass of summer marches and protests here calling for police reform in the wake of George Floyd's death in Minneapolis police custody was Devontae Hill, previously picked by Strickland as a protest leader he met with in considering immediate reform measures this past summer. Those first measures drew critical reactions from other protest leaders who called on Strickland to include them as well. They also said the earliest reforms amounted to the administration listing measures it had already taken or was in the process of taking. Police Director Michael Rawlings declaring at one point that the city had been ahead of the curve on those police reforms. The list of 7 finalists by the city was released earlier by the administration the same day that the city put up its new website on police excessive force complaints and investigations. The web portal, modeled after the Chicago Police Department database, called for in a city council resolution proposed by J.B. Smiley, Jr. And Smiley made the call based on reporting in the Daily Memphian by the Institute for Public Service Reporting at the University of Memphis. One of the 7 finalists for police director, former Oakland, California Police Chief Ann Kirkpatrick, was paid $60,000 by the city for her work as a consultant on the database or portal. Memphis police also agreeing this past week that any excessive force complaints upheld by police internal investigations will be sent to the District Attorney General's office for review and possible criminal charges. The agreement also an outgrowth of reporting by the Institute in the Daily Memphian. Former Vice President Al Gore comes to town to oppose the Byhalia pipeline.
This pipeline project is a reckless, racist ripoff. Reckless, racist ripoff. Remember the 3 R's.
Gore speaking to a group of several hundred at Weaver Park in southwest Memphis, the area the pipeline would cross.
So this is a ripoff also because this pipeline is going to be a very expensive project that is going to be worthless before its lifetime is concluded. This industry is building pipelines like they're going out of style. And by the way, they are going out of style, but they want short-term profits while they can still get them.
Gore was one of about a dozen speakers against the pipeline project by Plains All-American. The controversy has tapped a broader environmental movement, including the recent Protect the Aquifer effort over TVA's new water wells proposed to serve its $1 billion natural gas-fired plant in the same area. TVA, you may remember, backed off that plan in favor of getting its water from Memphis Light Gas and Water and its existing wells. Like some of the other speakers, Gore bringing up an earlier explanation from Byhalia pipeline advocates for why the area was chosen. The phrase used was that the area was, quote, the path of least resistance.
You know, somebody once said that in Washington, D.C., or in the political world, a gaffe is when somebody accidentally tells the truth. When the pipeline representatives said, this is the path of least resistance, that was a gaffe because he told the truth accidentally. Least resistance, I see a lot of resistance here today. And if this does not suffice to convince the county commission and the city council to make the right decisions, this resistance ain't nothing compared to what they're going to see if they try to keep going with this.
Path of least resistance has become a battle cry of sorts in this phase of the controversy. The next phase is a court fight. The question is whether it's circuit court and appeals within the state court system or a federal case. Speaking of TVA and Memphis Light Gas and Water, the issue of whether the utility should leave the Tennessee Valley Authority is close to being back on track again. Mayor Strickland, City Council Chairman Frank Colvette, and Councilmember Cheyenne Johnson want to start over on the GDS Associates Consulting contract that the council rejected last year. That rejection effectively stalled the process. But starting over in this case would not be the MLGW board rebidding the contract under this compromise. It would be moving ahead with the contract and including some oversight by the city administration as GDS gets binding rate and price quotes for all parts of what it would take for light, gas, and water to set up with another electric power provider. That includes infrastructure, transmission, and some power generation, either by the utility or by a company the utility has a contract with. The idea is to have this gathered and a decision made in 7 to 11 months on the feasibility. That's by the compromise out of City Hall. The council took no action because the Light, Gas, and Water Board met the next day. Although the compromise wasn't on that agenda, it was discussed, and the board decided as a result to vote on an earlier recommendation by Utility President and CEO J.T. Young. It was his earlier recommendation to put the whole process on hold because of how the deregulated wholesale power industry performed in the February February winter storms in Texas and elsewhere, namely the price spikes in some bills and blackouts in other areas. Instead of moving ahead with that, the utility would have started talking terms on a new contract with TVA. Well, the board voted that recommendation down on a 3-2 vote, but it stopped short of sending the GDS contract back to the council with some changes in timing that had been proposed by board member Stephen Wishnia. More talks to come among the board on this, probably involving a closed attorney-client meeting, because this deals with the contract bidding process. And this remains a contract between Memphis Light, Gas, and Water and GDS, not between the city and GDS, even though Light, Gas, and Water is a city-owned utility. So look for that meeting in the next 2 weeks. Strickland says the administration's role in this would be as a mediator of sorts and not taking charge of the process. He's even open to some kind of delay to give the market reaction to the winter storms a chance to settle. The decision for the council is whether it should formally approve the terms of the deal, which Strickland says he's open to changing again, and send that to the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Board, or wait for the board to come up with something on its end that they will send to the council. In other words, who goes first? The Shelby County Ethics Commission meeting March 23rd. That's when we will see if the commission does anything with the investigation and report the county attorney's office sought of County Commissioner Edmund Ford Jr. Attorney Brian Fawnin originally could not get enough detail in his first try, but resumed his probe after, turning up an invoice that showed Memphis Junior Achievement did indeed pay Ford's company $45,000 to buy computer equipment from a larger grant that Ford proposed for Junior Achievement and that the commission approved in 2019. Ford left the room when the commission voted and later said he considered that to be a recusal on the item. He also did not disclose the conflict of interest. Ford has not cooperated in Fawnin's investigation, but others have, resulting in his report this past January that was just made public this past week. Fawnin's recommendation is a referral from the Ethics Commission on this that could include moving for the commission to oust Ford from his seat. Fawnin saying the incident violates the county charter that calls for the immediate ouster of a commissioner who has a conflict of interest and does not at least disclose it, if not recuse himself or herself. Joining us now is Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives, now serving his fifth term as the representative from House District 25. The Speaker lives in Crossville, Tennessee. Mr. Speaker, thank you for being on the podcast. Usually the interview on this podcast, or the main event as we call it, dispenses with those formalities and gets right to the questions. But I wanted to start this way to set the stage for what might be a rather blunt first question that's not aimed at you specifically, but at the legislature as an entity. And it's a question that I've heard at least several times here in Memphis, but I have to say also one that I've heard even as far back as when the legislature had Democratic majorities instead of the current Republican super majorities. So with that preface, Mr. Speaker, what does the legislature have against Memphis?
I don't think the General Assembly has anything against Memphis. I think the General Assembly has oversight over the entire state of Tennessee. If you're looking at when we look at what local governments are doing, I think you could make a case that we've looked at Davidson County, Metro Nashville really closely, and we've pushed back on some things that they've tried to do, in East Tennessee as well. And we pushed back some in Memphis, on whether or not schools should be open. We think they should at least have a parent have it in option for classroom. But I don't think the General Assembly has anything. If you look at the funding that we've done, there's a new science building coming to the University of Memphis. We put in a lot of money for the waterfront downtown. We're working on trying to do something with Livet Shell. This coming year, we passed municipal school districts to help the schools in Shelby County and help areas on the fringes who wanted to have their own school systems. If you look at transportation funding, look at what all the money, the biggest road project we've done in state history on Lamar Avenue, that's coming to Memphis. So I don't think that you can look at one or two incidents and say that we have something against Memphis. I think that we love Memphis and we want Memphis to thrive. But we also have some oversight and on the direction that we feel comfortable to go sometimes, but that they're not willing to go.
And is this perhaps more of an urban, suburban, and rural divide in our state, or do those three facts of life in a state that is this culturally diverse make it easier said than done to have all three of those parts of the state coexist?
Well, I mean, I think you have to remember that all three parts of our state are distinctly different. I think you also have to look at it county by county. We have 95 counties inside the state of Tennessee. We have multiple municipalities inside the state of Tennessee. They all have needs and wants, and we try to do the best we can to help everybody in the state, on top of trying to help Tennesseans individually with many things that they're going through and businesses. And so I think it's a much bigger picture. I think sometimes when people don't get what they want, they feel like that it's a knock on them. It's not. It's just that there's other things that potentially rise to the level of more priority before that gets to it. And so I think we have a good relationship, or at least I do, with Mayor Strickland. Worked well with him and a lot of people in the city council. Work with Cato Johnson in Memphis on a regular basis. And so I think that the lines of communication are open. Hopefully they'll remain open. But at the end, we all want the same thing. And, we want Memphis and Shelby County to be a thriving economy, but we also want Tennessee to be a thriving economy. But we're not going to try to penalize Memphis and harm Memphis in any way. We want Memphis to be successful.
Mm-hmm. So do you view part of the legislature's role as kind of reacting to things that you might see local government do that don't line up with where the legislature is politically and philosophically?
Not always, but, for example, with the school situation, there was two districts, mainly Davison and Shelby County, who were the last ones to reopen, at least going to a hybrid plan. And we felt like, based on what we were hearing from constituents and people who live in Shelby County and Memphis, they wanted the schools to be open. They wanted in-person learning, have an option on that. And I think sometimes people look at the state as that's what the state wants, but you also have to remember we also have individuals who live in that community who contact us and send us the same information when they don't feel like they're being listened to at the local level. So I think depending on the situation, there's various things. But, when I come to Memphis and I meet with business owners, I was down there with Representative Parkinson last weekend. Mm-hmm. We want a thriving Memphis. We want a thriving Shelby County, and we'll continue to be working with them, even if we disagree. I met with the director of schools. I may not disagree with holding schools back that long, but we continue to have a good conversation and try to work together when we can.
Okay. From the relationship of the legislature to local governments, let's talk about the legislature's role with a Democratic president and Democratic control in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. How would you characterize that relationship?
Well, we'll have to see how it goes. I know Governor Lee has been trying to reach out to President Biden in the White House to talk about various issues. I don't know if he's having much luck right now getting that communication. I'm a firm believer in communication. I've talked to almost the entire congressional delegation, whether they're Republican or Democrat, about issues that are happening, things that we would like to have help on in Washington and things that they think that we might need to do here in Tennessee. But our biggest concern with what's going on in Washington right now is the amount of spending that they're doing. And that goes over many decades. That's not just limited, but there's a lot of spending. We're worried about inflation coming into our economy. And then what it looks like when the federal stimulus money runs out of the economy, what does that look like for us? And so we're very cautious as we're watching. And, we're a little worried about executive orders, just like everybody is, and what that may do to the state. So we're looking at avenues if there's, how do we push back against those if we need to?
Mm-hmm. As you may know, that there is some discussion among Republican legislators about how the state should receive and indeed, in some cases, if it should receive money from the American Rescue Plan that the Congress passed and the president signed into law. Does Tennessee need the American Rescue Plan?
I don't think any of the states need the American Rescue Plan. I don't think that it's really COVID driven. I think what this is nothing more than a bailout to states who have not run their pension plans, where they're upside down, states who have raised taxes because they have massive debt, and they are in their budgets not being very fiscal and conservative with it. And so I think this is an attempt to try to shore up those states. If that's what Washington wants to do, so be it. If they want to send us some money, we'll take a look at it. But right now, our economy in Tennessee is doing very well. And I think economies, as states start opening back up, it's a V-shaped recovery. It's not a U-shaped recovery. We're still waiting to see what we'll get in the stimulus money, just like we did last time. And I think we used it very effectively, not to grow the size of government, but really try to get it back into the business and the individuals in Tennessee so that they could stimulate the economy and maybe grow their business as the people were not going out in public to restaurants and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of expectation here, I have to say, from local officials in terms of preparing for this money and what it might do for people who are in need. And I don't think you're saying that there isn't any need in the state, right?
Well, I mean, you always have different needs. It really comes back to should government be the one spending on those needs, or is that something else, right? Government isn't the all-encompassing, all-doing, that should be the lifeline for everybody. It's supposed to be there to help people get back on their feet when they're down and be able to get back to a life where they can be prosperous and successful. I don't think government should be the one who are dictating what you do, how you do it, where you work, what you do. I just don't have that role of government. And so we'll continue to watch. It's one of those things, I'm sure many people appreciate the federal sending money, but you also have to be careful that you don't spend it in recurring expenses where you compound your budget problems 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Moving to another topic, as you well know, that there were at the start a couple of dozen bills in the legislature dealing with election reform. And they range from automatic voter registration to no more early voting. How do you think that's all gonna shake out? Are we going to see some changes in the state's voting law one way or another, or maybe both ways once this is all said and done?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think we have demonstrated in Tennessee that we have fair and free elections. I think it's gone well. I don't think the Senate bill about taking away early voting got a House sponsor, so that bill's dead. Mm-hmm. There's bills out there where they want same-day registration, same-day voting. I think that increases the capability for fraud. I don't agree with that idea. I don't foresee that passing, at least in a Republican-controlled General Assembly. I also don't think that you should mail ballots to every single individual who's registered to vote. There's at least some duty of people wanting to go out and cast a vote or request a ballot. And so there's also more voter fraud in that scenario when you mail a ballot to everybody, whether they request it or not. And I think our voting rolls in Tennessee with how you can vote, absentee ballot, early voting, election day, I think it's done very well. And I think we have found the right system for us. I know there's going to be pressures from court cases and other things of trying to move us in a direction where there could be more fraud, and we have to be very protective of not moving in that direction.
A lot of Tennesseans maybe had their first encounter with absentee balloting in 2020 as a result of being able to vote absentee simply because they had underlying medical conditions, or in the earlier court ruling because they had a fear of being exposed to COVID. Do you think that experience should lead to some easing of the restrictions or the reasons that you have for absentee voting in Tennessee?
Well, I mean, I thought before we got into COVID, our absentee ballot process was pretty easy. If you're over 60 and you can't go vote, you can request it. And if you have certain health conditions, you can request an absentee ballot as well. If you're a college student and you can't get back to vote, or if you're just on vacation and you can't get back, you can request an absentee ballot in Tennessee. I thought we were pretty favorable on the ability to absentee vote. I don't think that using COVID as an excuse to get an absentee ballot really was up to that level. I think now if you're in the hospital and you actually had COVID and you're going to be out for 3 weeks, I understand that. But just the feeling of the risk when the Secretary of State with all the election commissions did more in the voting sites, spread out the voting locations with inside where the booths were so you wouldn't come in contact, kept social distancing, did a whole lot of other things that allowed people to feel more comfortable when they went and voted. I don't recall a single case that came out of this election where anyone picked up COVID after they voted.
Mm-hmm. In Washington, as you may know, there is H.R. 1, a bill that would change voting regulations across the country. What do you think the legislature's response should be if that bill is passed in Washington?
I think we should sue Washington. I think it's an attempt to force the states to comply with what the federal government wants. When you saw the issues in the election, whether you think there was fraud or not, in all the states where they did what this bill wants to do, same day registration, same day vote, you also had an expansion of ballot harvesting was an issue in those states. You also had issues where they were removing in this bill, they want to remove the photo ID. So you don't have to provide a photo anymore when you go vote. I think this bill represents a huge liability as far as fraud. And I want to make sure that if people legally can vote, they can go vote. But I don't want to institute fraud into the election process.
But I think there were 60 lawsuits in various states contesting the results of the presidential election. None of those lawsuits succeeded in their claims that there were fraudulent things that took place.
Well, I don't think they really investigated enough. I mean, you look in states like up in the Northeast, you had judges who rewrote the election law that the legislative passed, which is not their role. They were supposed to interpret. They rewrote it and allow people to do things that were outside the law. In Atlanta, if you look in Georgia at that Secretary of State, what he did was go against the laws that they had in Georgia. And so I think, when you have the opportunity of same-day voting, same-day registration, and you mail ballots to every single individual who has not requested a ballot, and they know that those ballots are being delivered, and there's no mechanism to identify that is the person who voted, then that creates an opportunity for fraud. Whether or not they found enough fraud to overturn the election, I have no idea. But I would almost guarantee that there was fraud in those states going on.
Another point about this, though, is also that, we have courts and people have the courts available to go to in order for them to air grievances about whether they feel local voting laws are too restrictive. So don't the courts have a role? I mean, there is that part in the Constitution that says election laws are the purview, basically, of state legislatures. But citizens always have the right to go to court and see how that shakes out. So aren't the court rulings valid?
Well, what you had here in Tennessee, based off what we saw, we had 4 or 5 lawsuits that we had to defend. We always lost them in the almost all of them in the Davidson County Court, where we had a more liberal judge like they had in the Northeast. And then when we went to the next court, a lot of times we ended up winning and doing it. I think what you had here in Tennessee is we had a judge, and I think this is what has brought her up into asking questions about her, is you had her rewriting the actual application that the Secretary of State was trying to do based on the court order that she was doing. And so I think you have an opportunity where the judges are to interpret the law, but not to make new law. And I think there's a feeling out there that during this process that the judicial side in some of these instances were making law. All
right. Let's talk a little bit about the inner workings of being the Speaker of the House. When it comes time to fish or cut bait among Republican legislators on bills that there may not be 100% unanimity on within the caucus, Tell me how the discussion plays out. How much of this is just basic arm twisting to make the point that the bill isn't going to happen, or that it is going to happen?
As Speaker, I try to put my chairman, who I think will be successful, in positions to where I think they can do the job. If I have to go to my chairman that I put in place and twist their arm or twist the committee members to do something, whether to pass a bill or not pass a bill, then obviously I've not put the right people on the right committees and have the right chairman on the right committees. So I view my role as trying to put people in the right situations, and how bills pass or how bills fail or how bills are amended are based on the committee system. I'm very pro process and about the committee system and letting it work. Sometimes you have bills that a lot of people like, and they can't get the 4 votes it needs to get out of committee. That's just the way it goes. You have another chance next year. As far as trying to work with people, if there's legislation, like, for example, the governor has this criminal justice reform up, we're not trying to twist arms. We go and we talk to people, hear what they're saying, the issues that they have, and then we go back and try to work out those issues with the governor and figure out what we can agree on, what we can't agree on, and we get the bill hopefully to a point where there can be a good vote and hopefully it will pass. But we don't sit here and try to twist arms or force people to make votes that they don't want to. Down here, everybody is an individual and they need to vote how their district thinks they should vote.
Mm-hmm. In recent years, before you became Speaker, there were some real differences between the state House and state Senate, even with the super majorities, on how to proceed. I'll call it strategy for lack of a better term. Are there those differences today?
Well, I mean, when you have 2 bodies, one's made up of 99 people, the other's made up of 33, you're not going to have all 132 people agree with the direction. You have 2 leadership teams. But usually at the end, we all want to get to the same goal. Sometimes we want to go different directions, and that's fine. Sometimes there's certain bills that the Senate doesn't like, and there's certain bills that we don't like. But my philosophy is you continue to work together on those instances where you can. If you can't, then you just see what happens and let the cards fall where they fall. I have a very good relationship with Lieutenant Governor McNally, and I feel like with a lot of the senators. And down here, it's all about trust and respecting one another. And as long as you have that relationship with them, you can disagree, but you can continue the working together. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that's what we've been doing here for the last 2 years.
A final point. You were here a lot campaigning for Republican House members in the Shelby County delegation and in other parts of the state, in what were some very key races here locally and in other places. Another House Republican leadership was here as well as part of the effort. But it drew a lot of attention because I think when people see that, even in service of an election, their first thought is, this person is running for something too, or setting the stage to run for something. Are you thinking about running for governor next year?
No, not at all. My goal as Speaker and being a member of the Republican caucus is to help my members get reelected. And so I traveled the entire state helping members of the Republican caucus get elected. I think we're better off with having Republicans running the state, especially if you look at the last 10 years compared to the previous 100 when Republicans weren't running the state. I think it's very important for our state to have Mark White, John Gillespie, Ron Gant, Evan Vaughn, Tom Leatherwood as members of our caucus from Memphis, not to say anything bad about Antonio Parkson, Karen Camper, Joe Towns, Barbara Cooper, any of those individuals, London Lamar. We work well with them too. And so when it comes to election, it's just one of those things. My job is to make sure that we retain all of our members. And their job is to make sure they retain all their members. And at the end of it, we'll let the dust settle, and then we'll come back here to Nashville and continue working together to make Memphis a thriving city, working with Mayor Strickland, who I think has done a tremendous job in the last 5 years. Running Memphis and really getting the momentum and putting Memphis on a trajectory to be very successful and be the economic driver in our state that we need it to be.
A final point, we'll call it. Do you think that what we saw in the 2020 elections, the results, the hard-fought campaigns, do you think that has changed the state's red shade that we've had since 2000?
Well, I think if you look at the last election cycle, there was a lot of individuals, a lot of intensity in that election, people who were wanting to go vote. We set record numbers of voters here in Tennessee. I think in what we saw, almost all of our districts increase the margin of victory, even with this extra turnout. And in the seats where the other party, the Democrat Party, really went after trying to pick up the Jim Coley seat against Gillespie, tried to pick up Mark White again, and they weren't successful. We actually did a better job. They had better candidates, but we increased our margins even in those areas. So I feel comfortable as much as you can in an election that Tennesseans agree with the direction that Tennessee's going, about the benefits and how well we're being a beacon of hope and an example for the rest of America on how to run an economy, how to get businesses open, how to improve education, how to improve infrastructure without raising taxes. And so I think we've done a very good job, and hopefully that will continue as we go through the election.
We've been talking with Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton. This week on WKNO's Behind the Headlines, more of our ongoing discussion about possible changes to local economic development incentives. Our guests are Shelby County Commissioner Tammy Sawyer and Memphis City Council member Martavius Jones. You can hear the podcast of that show on our website now. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. You can subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Kix Patterson.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.